blood seeped between my fingers, warm and urgent. The shadow creature had dissolved beneath my flames, but not before its claws carved their message across my ribs, a reminder that darkness was winning this war. I should have been terrified. Instead, rage blazed through my veins, hotter than any fire I'd ever summoned. The sacred grove around me bore fresh scars from this week's attacks. Scorched earth where my magic had run wild. Withered trees that would never bloom again. 3 assaults in 7 days, each more vicious than the last. The shadows weren't growing bolder. They were growing hungry. "Lady Samantha." I spun toward the voice, flames already dancing at my fingertips. A messenger stumbled into the grove, his face flushed with panic and something else that made my stomach clench with dread. "The council," he gasped, doubled over and clutching his side. "They demand your presence. The shadows." His voice cracked. "They've breached the frosted north." My fire sputtered like a candle in a hurricane. The frosted north had been untouchable for centuries, a realm of eternal winter so remote it existed more in legend than reality. If the shadows had penetrated there... "When do I leave?" "Now, my lady." The portal stones are already prepared. The journey north stripped away everything I'd ever known. Each mile carried me further from sun-baked stones and air that tasted of cinnamon and smoke. By the 3rd day, my breath came out in visible puffs, and I had to focus to keep my inner fire from flickering out entirely. The council's crystal spires rose before me like frozen lightning strikes. Stepping inside felt like entering a tomb carved from the very heart of winter. The cold here wasn't temperature. It was presence, alive and watching. Then I saw him. He stood with his back to me, perfectly motionless, frost patterns spiraling outward from his feet in intricate lacework that caught the pale light. When he turned, the air left my lungs in a rush. Winter incarnate. Hair like fresh snow caught in moonlight, eyes the pale blue of glacial ice that had never seen sun, and features carved from marble by an artist who understood that beauty could wound as deeply as any blade. Power radiated from him in waves of cold that made my skin prickle with an awareness I didn't want to acknowledge. Our gazes locked across the chamber. His ice magic reached out instinctively. I felt it like fingers trailing across my skin, and mine responded before I could stop it. Where our powers met, steam rose in elegant spirals, and heat flushed my cheeks as something shifted deep in my chest. Recognition. Or hunger. I couldn't tell which was more dangerous. His eyes narrowed, studying me with the focused intensity of a wolf sizing up prey. I lifted my chin, refusing to be the first to look away. "The shadow plague spreads because of division," the head counselor intoned, his voice echoing off crystal walls like funeral bells. "Fire and ice, the strongest of the elemental lines. You will work together to find the source and destroy it." Together? Ice crystals formed in the air around the stranger as he spoke, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. A slight accent colored his words, something northern and refined that made my spine tingle. "Fire is chaos incarnate. How can I trust my life to someone who burns everything she touches?" The insult hit its mark, sending heat racing up my spine like wildfire. "And ice is death," I shot back, letting flames dance between my fingers to watch his pupils dilate. "How can I trust someone who freezes the very air he breathes?" Something flickered in those pale eyes, surprised that I'd fought back instead of simpering like most people probably did around him. "Enough." The counselor's staff struck stone with a sound like breaking bones. This attitude is precisely why the shadows grow stronger. You are Samantha of the Southern Emberlands, and you are Cortland of the Frosted Peaks. Your elements were meant to balance one another, not wage war, work together, or watch the world burn in shadow. Cortland. Even his name sounded like winter wind through bare branches. We left the council chambers in frigid silence, but I felt his presence like a constant chill against my back. Outside, he moved with fluid grace, each step precise and controlled as if he were dancing to music only he could hear. Everything about him screamed discipline and restraint, the polar opposite of my wild, instinctive magic. "We travel through your lands first," he said without looking at me, his breath forming small clouds in the air. "I assume you can manage not to set me on fire?" "I'll try to contain myself," I replied sweetly, then let my voice drop to something more dangerous. "Though I make no promises if you keep insulting me." That earned me a sharp look, but also something that might have been the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The journey south revealed the stark differences between us in ways that were both fascinating and infuriating. While I thrived in the growing heat, drinking in the sun like wine, Cortland wilted like some exotic flower exposed to direct flame. His ice magic worked constantly to cool him, tiny frost patterns forming and melting on his skin in an endless cycle that I found myself watching with inappropriate fascination. Yet he never complained, never asked to rest. He pressed forward with that same maddening composure that made me want to ruffle his perfect control to see what lay beneath. I caught myself stealing glances when I thought he wasn't looking. The way sunlight caught in his pale hair was like trapped starlight. His jaw clenched when he was concentrating on keeping himself cool. The precise, almost dance-like movements of his hands when he worked magic. When shadows attacked our camp on the second night, I discovered something that changed everything. His ice magic didn't freeze. It trapped. While my flames destroyed the writhing darkness, his frost held it in place like a spider's web made of winter, preventing escape. We moved together as if we'd trained for years, anticipating one another's moves, covering weaknesses I hadn't even known I had. After the last shadow dissolved with a shriek that made my teeth ache, we stood panting in the firelight. Cortland's usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there was something wild in his eyes that made my pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with the fight. "Not bad," I admitted grudgingly, trying to ignore how the orange light played across his sharp cheekbones. "You're not entirely hopeless yourself," he replied, but his tone lacked its earlier bite. Something softer had crept in, something that made my stomach flutter. That night, I noticed he sat closer to the fire than before. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I saw how the flames softened his harsh features, made his pale eyes seem almost warm. "You don't have to keep your distance," I said, stirring the coals with a stick to have something to do with my hands. "My fire won't burn you unless I want it to." He raised an eyebrow, and I caught a glimpse of something playful beneath his icy exterior. "And do you want it to?" I met his gaze steadily, feeling bold in the darkness. "Not as much as I did 3 days ago." Something shifted in the air between us, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before lightning strikes. Cortland's lips curved in what might have been a smile, and frost spiraled outward from his feet in patterns more complex and beautiful than anything I'd seen before. As we traveled north, trading the warmth of my homeland for the bite of approaching winter, our roles reversed with startling completeness. Now, I was the one struggling, my fire magic flickering weakly in the cold like a candle in the wind. But instead of satisfaction at my discomfort, I caught something like concern in Cortland's pale eyes. "You're shivering," he observed one evening as we made camp in a windswept valley that seemed carved from loneliness itself. Before I could respond, before I could summon my pride and insist I was fine, he raised his hands. Ice began to form around us, but not the brutal, cutting ice I'd expected. This was different. The The walls rose smooth and clear as glass, thick enough to block the vicious wind but transparent enough to let starlight filter through in rainbow prisms. I lit a small fire in the center, marveling at how the flames looked through the ice walls, like captured sunlight, dancing and alive and impossibly beautiful. "It's magnificent," I whispered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Light played across every surface, transforming our shelter into something from a fairy tale, like frozen fire. When I looked back at him, something had changed in his expression. The careful mask had slipped, revealing something softer underneath, more open, more human. "Fire can be beautiful too," he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual, "when it's not trying to burn everything down." The words hung between us, loaded with meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to decode. That night, huddled together for warmth inside our crystal sanctuary, he taught me secrets I'd never imagined. How ice could insulate as well as freeze. How cold could preserve rather than destroy. I lay with my back pressed against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the cool touch of his skin against my neck. The contrast of his chill and my heat created a balance that soothed something restless deep inside me, something I hadn't even realized was there until it went quiet. "In the north," he murmured, his voice rumbling through his chest into mine, "we have a saying, the coldest ice burns as fiercely as flame." I turned in his arms until we were face to face, and I counted the dark lashes framing his pale eyes, close enough to see the way his pupils dilated when I looked at him. In the South, we say, in the heart of every fire lies perfect stillness. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, the careful control he wore like armor slipped completely. What I saw underneath made my breath catch, longing and wonder and something that looked suspiciously like hope. "Perhaps," he whispered, his cool breath ghosting across my lips. "Our peoples understand one another better than we thought." The days that followed brought revelations that shifted the ground beneath my feet. Cortland taught me to use my fire more efficiently, showing me how to warm myself from within rather than wasting energy heating the air around me. His hands guided mine, his cool fingers wrapping around my wrists as he demonstrated the precise control I'd never learned. In return, I helped him discover something he'd apparently never been taught, that his magic responded to emotion, not will alone. That the most beautiful ice came not from rigid control, but from letting himself feel. "Your power responds to what's in your heart," I told him one morning, watching frost patterns spread from his fingers as he worked. The designs were different when he was relaxed, more flowing, organic, breathtakingly beautiful. "It's not as controlled as you pretend." A real smile tugged at his lips, not the polite exterior he usually wore, but something genuine and warm. "Perhaps you're rubbing off on me." He held out his hand, and ice formed in his palm. Not a weapon or a tool, but a perfect rose, delicate as spun glass and twice as lovely. When I reached for it, our fingers brushed, and instead of the usual painful steam, our magic merged. Patterns of frost and flame swirled in the air between us, creating something I'd never seen before. Fire that didn't burn, ice that didn't freeze, but pure light that danced and shimmered like liquid starlight. We both stared in wonder, the ice rose forgotten. "I've never..." Cortland's voice was barely a whisper. "Neither have I." My heart hammered against my ribs as our eyes met. The tension between us had transformed into something else entirely, something that made my magic surge and his respond in kind, like a call and answer that had been waiting centuries to find its match. That evening, as we sat side by side sharing our meager meal, his shoulder pressed against mine in a way that felt both casual and intimate. I felt the last of my walls crumble, "Tell me about your home," I said, wanting to hear his voice in the growing darkness. He painted pictures with words that made me ache with longing. Ice palaces that shifted color with the northern lights. Crystal forests that sang in the wind like nature's own orchestra. Underground springs where his people went to remember what warmth felt like. As he spoke, his hands moved through the air, creating miniature sculptures that illustrated his stories. Each one caught the light from my fire, refracting it into rainbow patterns that danced across the walls of our shelter like living jewels. "I'd like to see it someday," I admitted, watching a tiny ice palace melt in my palm, leaving only the memory of wonder. He looked at me with a surprise that seemed genuine. "You would go somewhere so cold willingly?" "If you were there to show me." The words escaped before I could stop them, but I didn't try to take them back. They were true, and that truth felt like freedom. His hand found mine in the darkness, cool fingers intertwining with my warm ones. Where our skin touched, tiny wisps of light rose like spirits into the night air, beautiful and impossible. Neither of us spoke of what was happening between us, but something fundamental had shifted. A bridge had formed across the elemental divide, built from understanding and something deeper that I was finally brave enough to name: love. As we ventured deeper into the frozen wasteland, following traces of shadow magic that grew stronger with each mile, our powers continued to evolve together in ways that defied everything I'd been taught. My flames would catch in his ice crystals, creating lights that pulsed like captured auroras. His frost would pattern itself after my fire's movement, forming designs that flowed like liquid starlight. But the shadows fought back with increasing desperation, and their attacks grew more vicious. During one particularly brutal assault, a tendril of darkness wrapped around Cortland's throat, like a noose. Terror, unlike anything I'd ever known, shot through me. Not fear for myself, but for him. The thought of losing him, of watching that controlled grace and hidden warmth disappear forever, sent my power surging to heights I'd never reached. My fire burned the shadow away, but not before I saw something in his eyes that stopped my heart. Not fear for himself, but the same desperate fear for me. That night, in another crystal shelter, he finally let his guard drop completely. "I was taught that fire was the enemy," he said softly, watching my flames dance as if they held answers to questions he'd never known how to ask. "That it destroys everything it touches, leaves nothing but ash and regret." He looked up at me, and the vulnerability in his expression took my breath away. "But your fire, it protects, it creates, it brings life." I moved closer, drawn by the honesty in his voice. "And I was taught that ice kills, freezes the heart, stills the blood, turns the world into a tomb." I reached out, tracing the sharp line of his jaw with my fingertips. "But your ice preserves. It shelters. It transforms ugliness into beauty." We were close enough now that I felt his cool breath against my cheek, marveled at the way his pupils dilated when he looked at me. When our lips met, it was a moment of perfect balance between opposing forces that created something entirely new. Our magic exploded around us, fire and ice merging in ways that should have been impossible. Steam rose and crystallized, creating patterns of such beauty that I broke the kiss to watch them spiral through the air above us like living art. "The shadows," Cortland breathed, his eyes wide with wonder as he looked past me toward the walls of our shelter. I turned and gasped. The darkness that had pressed against us all evening was retreating, burned away by the light of our combined power. An old memory stirred. Fragments of a story my grandmother had told me about balance and harmony, about powers meant to work together rather than tear one another apart. That revelation led us to hidden archives deep within a mountain where the fire and ice territories met, a place that existed in the space between worlds, where ancient knowledge had been preserved by both elements working in harmony. The scrolls we found there told a story that changed everything. Long ago, fire and ice had worked together. The greatest mages of each element bonded, their combined power maintaining balance in the world. But pride and fear had driven them apart. The last bonded pair had died in conflict, their broken connection creating a wound in reality itself, a wound that had festered into the shadows now threatening to consume everything. "We have to heal it," I said, looking up from the ancient texts with growing certainty. "Our magic working together. This is what was lost. This is what the world needs." Cortland's expression was unreadable as he studied the bonding ritual described in the scrolls. "It's permanent," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Our magic, our souls, they would be eternally intertwined. There would be no going back." His cool fingers found mine, and I felt the slight tremor in them. "Are you willing to risk that? To bind yourself forever to someone like me?" The word risk struck me as completely wrong. "You're not a risk," I said, squeezing his hand until he looked at me. "You're my balance." I created a small flame, and he automatically responded with crystalline ice. They spun together, creating something new and beautiful and right. This is what magic is supposed to be. The ritual chamber lay at the mountain's heart, where veins of fire and ice met in eternal dance. The ancient runes carved into the walls glowed as we entered, crimson and blue lights that pulsed like twin heartbeats. In the center stood a circular platform, split by a line of pure darkness. As we took our places on either side of the divide, the shadows gathered around us, drawn by our power but held at bay by our combined light. The ritual words came naturally, as if our magic remembered this ancient binding. "I am fire," I spoke, letting my power flow freely for perhaps the first time in my life. "I am passion and transformation, creation and destruction, the spark that kindles life from nothingness." "I am ice," Cortland responded, his magic rising to meet mine like a symphony finding its harmony. "I am preservation and protection, reflection and clarity, the force that gives shape to chaos." Our powers spiraled together, fire and ice merging in impossible ways that made my soul sing. Where they met, new forms of light emerged, colors I had no names for, patterns that seemed to exist beyond the edges of perception. The shadows pressed closer, fighting against the building radiance with desperate hunger. For a moment, doubt flickered in Cortland's eyes. "Fire and ice were never meant to touch," he whispered, and I heard centuries of teaching in those words. "What if we destroy one another?" I reached across the divide, taking his hands in mine and pulling him toward me. "Fire can burn alone," I said, looking into his eyes and seeing my own soul reflected there. "And ice can freeze alone. But together." I pulled him closer, erasing the line of shadow between us with our joined hands. "Together we create something entirely new." Our lips met as the ritual reached its crescendo. Power surged through us, around us, binding us together in ways that transcended physical form. I felt his essence merging with mine. Cool precision, blending with warm passion, caution embracing spontaneity, preservation dancing with transformation. The shadows screamed as light exploded outward, burning away the darkness that had plagued the world for centuries. When the radiance faded, we stood as one, our magic permanently intertwined, our souls bonded beyond any possibility of separation. Where our powers had once created painful steam, they now produced shimmering auroras that danced through the air like dreams given form. The wound in reality had healed, replaced by something new. Magic that celebrated union rather than division. We emerged from the mountain to find the world transformed. The borderlands between fire and ice had become a realm of impossible beauty, where warm springs bubbled through eternal frost, creating gardens of crystal flowers that bloomed with inner flame. But the true wonder lay in the change within ourselves. Every touch between us now created light, ribbons of luminescence that reflected our emotions in ways both beautiful and intimate. When we embraced, our magic danced together in perfect harmony, neither dominating but creating something greater than either could achieve alone. Months passed in discovery and wonder. Every day with Cortland revealed new facets of his nature, like examining a perfect crystal from different angles. His laughter, rare at first, emerged more frequently, cool and clear as mountain streams, but warming me more than any fire ever could. When he smiled, frost spiraled outward from his feet in intricate patterns that matched his joy. One evening, as we made camp in a crystalline cave that had become one of our favorite hideaways, I watched him create ice sculptures with absent gestures while lost in thought. Each one caught the light from my flames, refracting it into rainbow patterns. "You're staring," he said softly, not looking up from his work but smiling in that way that never failed to make my heart skip. "You're magic." I moved closer, fascinated by how my ambient warmth created tiny prisms in his frost. "It's like you're capturing light itself." He looked up then, and the intensity in his pale eyes made my breath catch. "And yours burns so bright, I can hardly believe it doesn't consume you." "Maybe it does," I whispered, leaning into his touch as his cool fingers brushed my cheek with the reverence of someone handling something precious. "Maybe that's what fire magic is. Constant consumption, constant rebirth." His other hand found mine, and our magic merged again. This time, instead of fighting the reaction, we explored it with the wonder of children discovering something miraculous. Frost crept up my arm, not to freeze but to create patterns that my fire filled with light. Flames danced around his shoulders, not to burn, but to cast him in a warm radiance that made his eyes shine like stars reflected in clear ice. "I never knew," he said, wonder in his voice, "that fire could be so gentle. I never knew ice could be so warm." When our lips met this time, our magic exploded outward in pure joy. Flames wrapped in frost spiraled around us like a cocoon of light, and the cave's crystals caught and amplified the effect until a galaxy of our own making surrounded us. Fire and ice in perfect harmony, passion and precision creating something that transcended both. We built our home where the borderlands met, a palace of crystal walls that held eternal flames, warming without burning, illuminating without blinding. Gardens bloomed with flowers made of living ice, their petals containing dancing fires that cast ever-changing lights across the landscape. But the true magic lay in the quiet moments, when Cortland absently cooled the tea I'd made too hot, when I warmed his hands after he'd spent hours working with delicate ice sculptures, the way our powers responded to one another without conscious thought, an eternal dance of balance and harmony that had become as natural as breathing. Each touch still created light, forming shapes that reflected our moods. Dragons when we felt playful, flowers when we felt content, intricate mandalas when we felt at peace with ourselves and one another. One morning, I woke to find Cortland tracing patterns on my skin with his cool fingers, tiny ice crystals forming and melting in my warmth, leaving trails of light that lingered for heartbeats before fading like the most beautiful dreams. "What are you writing?" I asked, my voice still rough with sleep. "Our story," he replied, continuing his delicate work with the focus of an artist creating a masterpiece. How fire and ice found one another. How opposites became one. I captured his hand, pressing it against my heart where my fire magic burned brightest and most true. Tell me. His smile was like dawn breaking over snow-covered peaks, beautiful and pure and full of promise. It begins with a stubborn fire mage who refused to be intimidated by an arrogant ice lord, and an insufferable ice prince who thought fire had no beauty, I added, pulling him closer until we were sharing breath and warmth and the magic that bound us both. Who learned that fire could warm without burning? His lips brushed my forehead, cool against my perpetual warmth, in a way that sent shivers of pleasure down my spine. And that ice could protect without freezing. I traced the sharp line of his jaw, watching light follow my fingertips across his skin like stardust. We spent the morning like that, whispering our story back and forth between kisses and caresses, each memory punctuated by touches that created spirals of light around us. Our shared bed became an island of magic, a place where fire and ice continued discovering new ways to harmonize, new heights of pleasure and connection that left us breathless and amazed. Now, as evening settles over our mountain home like a blanket woven from twilight and starlight, I sit beside Cortland, watching our combined magic paint auroras across the sky. His cool hand rests in my warm one, our powers flowing together as naturally as the tide, creating patterns that tell our story to anyone who looks up. A tale of fire and ice, of opposition transformed into harmony, of love that transcends all boundaries. The shadows are gone, burned away by the light of our bond. In their place, new magic flourishes, healing spells that combine ice's preservation with fire's regeneration, protective barriers that burn and freeze simultaneously, lights that warm and soothe at once. Young mages come to learn from us, watching in wonder as we demonstrate how opposing forces can create beauty beyond imagination. At night, we sit on our crystal balcony, his cool strength pressed against my warmth, our magic dancing above us in ribbons of impossible color. The auroras we create together swirl across the stars, flames caught in flowing ice, telling stories of love that conquers division. Do you ever miss it? I ask sometimes, thinking of the pure fire magic I once wielded, the simplicity of a single element answering only to my will. His answer comes with a kiss that tastes of winter berries and wood smoke, of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. How can I miss anything when every day brings new wonders? He creates a crown of ice above my head with a casual gesture, and my flames fill it from within without conscious thought, forming a halo of dancing light that makes him smile. Every moment with you reveals magic I never dreamed possible. Our powers continue evolving, creating new marvels as we learn ever deeper levels of harmony. Each day brings fresh discoveries, new ways our magic can combine to protect and nurture our united realm. And each night, as we lie together surrounded by the swirling lights of our combined power, I thank whatever fate brought us together, fire and ice, passion and precision, two halves of a greater whole that were always meant to be. Together, we've become more than our separate elements. We are dawn and dusk, the meeting of opposite forces that creates every color in between. Our love shapes the world around us, transforming the once stark border between our lands into a realm of endless wonder where fire and ice dance in eternal harmony. In these quiet moments before dawn, when stars fade and morning light paints the ice in shades of gold and rose, I understand the deepest truth of all, that love itself is the greatest magic, capable of transforming not our two hearts alone, but an entire world.